I am happy to welcome our keynote, David Lankes. He is I actually, in addition to my day job, I am an adjunct professor for the University of Denver, and I have frequently quoted David. And I was, when we were planning the conference here, I think he might be in Texas. So I just Googled, and he actually lives here. And it was perfect because he was somebody I wanted to hear from. And it was a real short commute for him. So we're really lucky to have him. He'll be presenting AI, Dream, Dread, Deconstruct. So welcome, David.
Hold on a sec. Get arranged. Get this one. All right. Oh, there we go. Yes, this is my home library. So if you hang around long enough, you'll probably see my wife putting a massive dent in the new books and materials. Koha and New Zealand, ironically, but it all works together. And so they asked me to come and speak, and I think we had about a 10-second conversation about a potential topic. And of course, we went to the default these days, which is artificial intelligence, which is, I think, the current obsession of everyone. If you're not worried about a policy, you're thinking about a policy, or you have people yelling about the need for a policy, or people yelling that we don't need a policy, we're really happy. And so today I want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence in the idea of librarianship, and we're going to dream, dread, and deconstruct. So dream, dread, deconstruct. We're doing a project with a bunch of state libraries in the US, and we're saying, and we're in the US, I don't think I need that part, but anyway, and when we began to think about what is it that we were going to do with the project, actually the State Library of Hawaii suggested this model, which is we need to dream, dread, and deconstruct. We need to dream, is this a chance to do really cool things? Can we use this as a way of advancing librarianship and our mission? We need to dread, is this a place that's going to put everyone out of business? Is this something we're going to have our machine overlords, etc.? And ultimately, we need to deconstruct, which is we need to do particularly what this group of librarians is good at, which is breaking things. We need to go in and find out what works, what doesn't, what's its limits, how do we do this, what we're going to break. So that's the goal here, is to talk about AI in a realistic fashion. And if I could just get a sense, well, how many people would say that you're like really good at AI and you're building your own chatbots? How many of you would say, I played with it, I made a pretty picture, and I cheated on an exam? Yeah, very good. It's not cheating. How many of you would say, I haven't tried it? How many of you say, I just don't care? All right. So I want to give you a little bit of basics as we run into this. You can't read this graph, I know, so I'll repeat it. This is the hype cycle, which is the Gartner Group. If you're not familiar, Gartner Group is a really good consulting firm that I think mints money from organizations trying to figure out the future. And many, many, many years ago, they realized that the traditional bell curve of adoption of innovation didn't work, right? This is Everett Rogers, where you have innovators, and then you get early adopters, and an early majority, and a late, right? And laggards, that's where we get that whole laggards term. They said it doesn't work that way. They said when you look at technology, what happens is people start talking about something, the innovation trigger, or a new discovery is made, a new piece of software, a new company, a new function. As people begin talking about, thinking about, usually without actually using or implementing, they begin to build up expectations for it. This is what they call the inflated expectations. So the idea is, well, AI could do something interesting. Maybe it could do this. Maybe it could do that. Maybe it could change the world as we know it. I think AI is going to replace the universe, right? That hype cycle, we get maximum inflation. Then what happens is you realize it can't do that. And so you go down, this is my favorite innovation term, to the trough of disillusionment. Right? And then you figure out that while it can't do everything, there is stuff it can do well, and you move up the slope of enlightenment, where it's an informed conversation, and finally you end up in the plateau of productivity. So you know, you could probably, I'm guessing you guys have enough experience with koha that you probably lived through this. Like the next version will solve all our problems. It will allow us to get rid of unruly patrons. It will, you know, feed the poor and help our undergraduate study, etc. So what I want to point out about this was one they made in 2023. It was specifically about AI. Two things to notice. First of all, generative AI is at the tippy top of peak of inflated expectations. Now, it's now probably about 6 to 8 months since this came out. It's probably busily falling down the trough of disillusionment as we speak. That's one thing to note. The other thing that I will tell you though is all these little dots are where things are. All of these dots are related to artificial intelligence. So generative AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, all these things is only one flavor, if you will, of AI. We've got other things from AI simulation, causal AI, we've got edge AI, no idea, knowledge graphs, cloud services, autonomous vehicles, all of these other uses. So if you have been thinking about waiting out AI, you're going to have a comfortable period for about a month. But really, the other thing is, we're now not talking about AI is coming, we're talking about AI is here. And I want to talk about what that means. And I want to give some definitions. So the first problem that people often get in AI, hold on just a moment, I'm in the wrong place. Oh, I got it. Just click. Let's do some definitions. Definition number one, generative AI. This is what I call the Hydra, which is that you'll hear people talk about AI all the time. Which one do they mean? There's so many flavors, there's so many versions, there's so many approaches. It can be mind-boggling and frankly frustrating and frankly ear to tune out. So the first one that I want to talk about is generative AI. Generative AI, which is also technically the use of large language models, is AI that has scooped an enormous amount of data from the internet, and not necessarily in a legal fashion, let's be honest. So they've taken just about every copy of every ebook they could get, whether they licensed it or not. They've taken your rantings on Facebook about your uncle during Thanksgiving. They found all of this information, grabbed it, gobbled it up without anyone noticing originally. And they build this system where people can ask questions and it will generate human-like responses. Generative AI works on the idea of massive amounts of text, by the way, and images and music and all of these things. It finds regularities in them. And then when you ask a question, I swear to God, it's like AI Mad Libs. It identifies the structure of your question, the structure of response. It has a bunch of blank spots. And then it, using sophisticated, frankly, algebra, figures out what to put in the spots. Can you tell me what the best integrated library system is? So it says, oh, I need a spot for integrated library system. I need to find the use of the word best. I need to find sort of what other language, and it fills it in, it generates an answer. And that answer is frighteningly good. Not necessarily accurate, who cares about that, but frighteningly good. They've done the same thing with images. All the images you're going to see, except for a few in this presentation, are AI generated. This is my Chimera and the Hydra. Same thing. You ask for a Chimera and a Hydra, and it looks for all the uses, by the way, of text using those words, finds the average, and produces it. This generates a couple of massive problems that we as librarians cringe at. The first is, its job is to fill in these spots, to give you an answer. It's told to give you an answer. This is very much like the function of my father. He will give you an answer on anything, regardless of his knowledge of the domain. It was great to watch him play Jeopardy because out would come the question and he would give the answer and then the person would give the right answer and he would just like ignore the fact that he got the wrong answer. It's very good. But anyway, so generative AI does amazing things. It's very human-like. We're going to talk about some of the limitations, but that's the one that everyone's talking about. Right? Other thing that it does is it will make up resources. It will give you an answer. the data it's pulling from. It didn't necessarily have access to that data. It has a currency problem. That is to scoop up all of this text takes a long time and processes a long time. And so unlike search engines, which have sort of figured out how to spike it with most recent information, generative AI didn't know. When ChatGPT first came out a year and a half ago, it would talk about Hillary Clinton's campaign for the presidency as being current because that's when the data was gathered, right? Now they're trying to overcome it, but it's still having these limitations. The other, we'll get to that later. Data-driven AI is the notion that you're also taking a bunch of data, you're crunching it, you're coming up with predictable paths. But this is data on a specific topic. So you can imagine taking things like searches for books on Amazon or the idea of circulation data across all koha users. You can crunch that data wrangling, data science, whatever you're going to call it, and from that you can generate examples, you can generate responses. We're going to show an example here today of that. And then what I call project-specific AI, which is using these different tools and techniques to solve a specific problem. And we're going to show an example of that as well. So that's the first thing to know. When we're talking about AI, lots of different ones. Each one having its own limitations. The AI chimera, anyone? Chimera? Percy Jackson, chimera. What's a chimera? Perfect. So in ancient Greek, a chimera was the head of a lion, the tail of a serpent, and it was a bunch of sort of mashup. There's actually a biological sense that it's still used. I, just in case you were wondering, am a chimera. And you're like, that's great, Dave. Do you want to say that in public? Yes, I do. Because I have two different DNA systems in my body right now. I had a blood marrow transplant. My son was the donor. So I have my skin cells and muscle cells, and then I have his blood cells, right? So if I ever rob a bank, I'm leaving blood evidence. Interesting fact, it turns out I inherited a genetic blood disorder from my son. So I know, I'm my own grandpa. It's a weird story. The AI chimera is my sense of saying a lot of what we do doesn't feel that different than how we did it 5 years ago. But the infrastructure and the technology that runs those things has become replaced by AI. So for example, if you drive a car and it has intelligent cruise control where you can get on the highway, set it at 65, which would be the legal limit, and a car, you come up to a car, it will automatically slow down, it'll pace that car. That's not someone sitting there making a bunch of different deterministic rules. They just took a lot of people driving a lot of hours in a car and came up with an algorithm that does that pacing. It's the same thing. So I have a Tesla. Don't yell at me. My kids were very angry. I said, I love when Elon Musk says stupid things, my car gets cheaper. They put out an update, and this is Tesla is 15 years, the most amazing 15-year-old engineers building the best iPad you can imagine, and then they put a car around it. Because they sent out an update to the self-driving feature, and the highlight in the release notes was, we have replaced 30 million lines of C++ code with our new driving model. And I'm like, who knows what that means? Who isn't frightened by that we don't need that 30,000, whatever it is. But that's what you see is you see the replacement in these driving models. If you have a lovely watch, a smart watch, and you've noticed that you walked for 14 minutes and forgot to hit the track mic because it doesn't count unless you track it, and it comes up and says, hey, you look like you're on a walk. And it's kind of like Clippy, but on your wrist. That's an AI algorithm. It's built in. How do we track time? How do we track effort? How do we track motion? Those are all being generated out of AI. Your social media algorithms have always sucked, but now they suck with AI because they're using experience and how we find other things. And my favorite example of this is music. So I am a Spotify addict. I love Spotify. It is sort of my life is Spotify, right? And many people know that music can change your mood, right? If you're in a bad mood, you put on happy music, etc. So it's kind of interesting. How does Spotify figure out the next song to play? Spotify uses 3 different AI algorithms. One is it uses an algorithm to do sort of the content of music. This has this rhythm, it has this melody, etc. The other is it looks at other people and what they have listened to. People who listen to the song tend to like this song. And the third is actually a social media scraping tool where they see discussions of different artists and different songs in relation to each other. All of this, without human intervention, tells you what your next song is, which is potentially what your next mood is. And so AI is now just about everywhere, whether we consider it or not. So that's the first thing. So let's talk, though, about the hype for a moment. Because what we're finding is tremendously varied impact in the field. For example, the publishing world is currently in an existential crisis. I have to say, I've been around long enough, I've earned all this gray hair, that when the new tech comes out, I'm used to librarians going through existential crises. Right? Oh my God, CD-ROMs have replaced their books, and soon will replace us. And oh, the PC, no one will ask us questions. And then the internet put us out of business. And then Google put us out of business. And we're still here. What I have to say is, with AI, I have not heard the librarian existential crisis. There are some cautions. There's a lot of, oh God, not another thing I've got to learn. But there's very little, I feel like I'm going to be replaced by this. That is not true in the publishing industry. In the publishing industry, they feel they're about to go out of business. They have a really interesting situation. So, for example, many of the book publishers are running into the problem where, one, they're getting a lot of AI submitted materials. There are literary journals and academic journals and peer-reviewed journals that have, in essence, shut down because they've gone from 50 submissions to 5,000 submissions in a month. And they can very easily determine that's AI, that's human written, that's quality or not. But they just don't have time. They just can't deal with the volume of input that's coming. Amazon, Kindle, their publishing unit, where people could self-publish books, had to limit authors to submitting 3 books a day. To be really clear, a day. And that was when they implemented the limit. So one can imagine what it was like beforehand. If you're on Facebook at all, you're going to see ads for, hey, you can write a book tomorrow. Click, 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 publish. And you can. And it might suck, but it's Kindle. So, Amazon uses that. But like Amazon Prime to me is like the videos that even YouTube rejected. And then right? And then some brilliant piece on top of it. It's very odd. Anyway. So the publishing industry is going through this nature of we can just produce so much. What's a role? The other role that they're very much having to play this interesting line is, on one hand, they make money from content producers, authors, illustrators, right? And yet they're looking at AI that can provide editing support, can write, can provide images, and right? So they're running into this. How do we utilize this technology and not alienate this entire community of creators? And they're trying to figure out what that fine line is. But you have in your collections today AI-generated content. Period. You do. And so how do we deal with that? How do we note-take it? How do we put it in a record? How do we search on it? Education. Education is now going a major shift. The major shift is we thought critical thinking was our main job, and we defined critical thinking as read and summarize. Right? Compare and contrast. We felt that the labor of reading and coming up with an abstract was a way of stimulating thinking and learning. AI does this extraordinarily well. If you haven't already, you're going to get a knock on the door from people like Iris AI and others saying, hey, we've got this great workbench tool. You can search this open repository, bring back 60 documents, search against the 60 documents, ask the documents questions. Create a chatbot just on those 60 documents. They're like PDF readers on steroids, right? But the problem with PDF readers on steroids is it replaces half of my curriculum, which is not happening, right? I would teach a class, it's perspectives of information, it's an overview of the field, and I thought, maybe I should implement a quiz or a test. And I put together a test, and ChatGPT aced it. It did really well. And I'm like, well, that's not gonna work. Yeah. And so a lot of faculty were running around going, what do I do now? How do I teach this? If it's not the idea of synthesize, of create abstracts and compare and contrast, and the machines do this in 10 seconds and I can't tell the difference, Not so much that's cheating, but really, what am I trying to provide in terms of a skill, and how can I do that? How can I make sure that these tools that are available are utilized properly? But that starts with the question of, what am I trying to accomplish? If I'm trying to accomplish the ability to read quickly and synthesize, it's done. If I'm trying to write an essay, it's done. Now we have to think about, how can we craft this educational experience? So this is a huge issue. Social media and qualitative analysis. So many of you live in the life of quantitative analysis. You have more stats than you know what to do with, and you can look through them, and we're going to talk about why AI sucks at doing that, believe it or not. But qualitative analysis. So Austin Public Library down the street, they have someone that wants to give a program. They create a record, which is what program they're going to give. They assign it to a librarian who's going to work with them. They put together the program. This is a document that they then track. At the day of the program, they sit there and go, about 80, and put in a number. But they also collect things like, was this good? Or have people come up going, this was an amazing program, it changed my life. Oh, my child did this. Get all this qualitative data, and they have an impossible time getting librarians to record the data. It takes too much time, it's too much effort, and ultimately, because they don't see the value coming back. The qualitative data, the stories go in, and they never see anything as a response. They never see utility to it. Well, what we found with just basic off-the-rack ChatGPT or Copilot or pick it of your flavor is it does a pretty good job of just combing through qualitative data and say, here's some top topics, here's some general areas, here's what they said in relation to whatever. And so we can very quickly generate the utility of qualitative data that has been a strong barrier beforehand. Now, I'm a qualitative researcher, and we can have a lot of time about the validity of that and such, but honestly, that's a really good cut and dry system. We're talking about data storytelling. One of the projects we're working on is, how does a library use all the data at its discretion, from circulation, from reference transactions, from gate counts, from whatever? How does that turn into telling the narrative of the story? How is it that they report to the provost? How is it that they report to the mayor to get more money, to get more support, to understand what's going on, right? And what we're finding is these kinds of tools do amazingly well at integrating qualitative data into your narrative, into your storytelling. We anticipate many, many reactions, such as medical. We've seen example after example of crunching a lot of data has real advances in medical data. And this means we can finally go beyond you having every disease when you look at WebMD. So as an example, taking mammograms, being able to take mammograms, take a couple thousand of them where we've identified cancer, take a couple thousand where we've not identified cancer, run them through learning algorithms, and then it turns out with higher precision than radiologists, the computer can say there is a 98%, there's a 96% chance that this is cancerous or clean. And it can do it millions of scans every second, every minute of every day. We're starting to see that now happen. And so the question then becomes, what's the role of the doctor? How do we trust it? All these kinds of things. But we're anticipating very large impacts. And then I have bad news. It really kind of sucks at two of our major tasks, metadata generation and search. So we also see that there are things it doesn't do well. So for example, this was a query I put in, which was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Can anyone see the problem?
5 horses.
There are 5 horses. Now, to be honest, the Bible didn't mention the number of horses, but I have so many of these. I love coming up with these, right? So if you've played with it, this is not ready for prime time in many cases, right? I always say, if you want to go back to your library, if you want to get your librarians into AI in some way, I say you have 3 different sessions. The first session that everyone has to have a computer, you say, try it. And the first reaction is almost, oh my God, this is cool, this is amazing, that's a great job. The second time you come together, someone's done the first one, they go, what? Wait, huh? And then the third one is, oh my God, you just see this, right? So we're gonna look at that. So there's room to grow and there's rooms to go forward. What I want to show you, though, is the progress that has been made and can be made. So what I want to talk about is AI in the catalog and metadata generation. Now, I am going to talk about tagging, which means that I'm going to be talking about unstructured vocabularies, but we'll mention them within. So the question is, can we use this to further our cataloging efforts or our special collection efforts and descriptions? And what I want to do is I want to walk you through the direction that we're headed. So direction number one is if we have a large collection of images, what we would do as good librarians is we would develop or utilize or identify an existing taxonomy in which we could apply these descriptors. Right? We'd either come up with our own controlled vocabulary, we'd use Getty's, we'd have some way of tagging these images. And then we would manually go through and tag these images. And when we do it, we know that's there aren't that many catalogers left in the world, but we know that it is a specialized talent. We worry about bias, we worry about different descriptors, we worry about precision, we worry about a lot of things. But it takes a lot of time. So the question is, can we begin to use AI and AI-like algorithms to do it? So the first example I want to give you is, I have that image on the top of that lovely woman, and I want to have the computer tag it for me. So what I could do is I can go into an AI tool and hope for the best. You can't see that. Do I have to move it? Yes. So this is a site called Zimler, and Zimler, it was, and let me tell you how cool it was. Zimler is a service that they want to build apps. They want to build image identifying apps. If you've ever had one where you said, what kind of plant is this? And you take a picture and it says, that's a hemlock tree. Don't eat, right? That's what they want to do. So they built a lot of these imaging tools. But one of the things you can do is you can go in and you can train it. So let's just pretend that I have two very simple tags. I'm going to provide it images and I want to know if it's a cow or if it's a person. Very exciting. The way you do this is you find a lot of examples. So for example, there's a couple of hundred cow pictures in here of different kinds of cows, right? And if we go back and we have people, there's a bunch of different people pictures. Now note something very specific about these pictures. Pictures of different races, different genders, different ethnicities, right? Because if you don't train it on representative data, you will get non-representative results. We've all heard the horror stories. And then based on these different trained models, I can take an image here. I can upload an image here. And I can say, tell me what that is. And it says, it is 96.3% confident this is a person. And only 4% that it's a cow. Which in this image in particular is so problematic, I didn't want to show it to you, but I want you to be aware of when you set up the data and when you set up the right question, etc. I've given this computer no other choice than cow, right? What it wants to say is it's 96%, which is a good score that it's a woman, but it's not completely confident. And so the only way I've allowed it to say, I don't know, is cow. So this is one way to do it. This takes a lot of computing power. It takes a lot of time to identify the training data set. Usually it takes hours to build the training data set. But you can see once you've set it up, you could very efficiently begin to assign a controlled vocabulary to the system. It doesn't do hierarchy very well, but so far so good. But where's this headed now? What's headed now is with ChatGPT and with large language models like Gemini, like Copilot, etc. What they've realized is I have lots of examples of cows and women and people, and I have a pretty good ability to quote unquote understand what those ideas are without you having to tell me. In other words, I pre-trained this model. So what we can do now is instead of having to program it all out, is we can go to the second setup where we just use its programming. He says, hopefully. Yes, no, yes. There we go. So this is no training set, no training data. It's basically pulling from large language models that scan to the world, right? So nothing specifically that I put into it. And now if I want to upload an image, and now I'm going to upload a cow, by the way, I have a cow problem. It's not good, but I'm in Texas, so it's okay now. So I have it run on this image. And what this is going to do is rather than run it against my tags, it's going to come up and say, okay, this is 100% a farm. This is absolutely cattle, agriculture, and the pasture. I think they're about 80% that it's an animal. I'm not quite sure how 100% cow and 80% animal works. 70% beef, probably not happy for the cow, right? 50% milk. Interestingly enough, that is a dairy cow. And then here's a bunch of tagging you want. So we can use this without any training, without any effort, with, by the way, zero technology skills, zero programming skills to create a system that will auto tag images at a large scale. Are there limitations? 100%. Is it going to be perfect in all places? No. Does it do well with our custom control vocabulary? You saw these steps you have to build to do your custom vocabulary, which is not just used without them. But we are at the point now with ChatGPT, with others, that you can simply throw in an image and say, tell me what it is. Or, I didn't bring this up today, you can take a Microsoft Word file, type all the terms you want to tag with as a boring, old, flat Microsoft Word file, upload it to ChatGPT, upload an image, and it will tag to that. Zero programming, zero effort. You can have to go in and create your own search engine, which is not through programming. You literally talk to it. Like I did this and said, you can only choose a word that's off this Microsoft Word. Stop making your own stuff up. You've got to pick one. You've got, right? So but you're talking to it. You're not actually going into Python or et cetera to do it. So AI has great and huge potential, but it has severe limitations. And frankly, as a library community, we're not thrilled with pretty good. We can discuss whether that's a good way or a bad way, but this is pretty good. Now, one other thing I've got to show you. I've got to show you a picture. So this is a cat, just in case you're wondering. Thanks, Dave. Great for a keynote. This is a cat, but it's not. This is a result. I was in Boerne, Texas, and we were doing a Let's Play with AI. And they were saying, well, we got this. We're working with the Historical Society. We want to do a thing about the Old West. And they keep wanting to put cacti in the poster. And there are no saguaro cactuses in Texas, so stop it. And so we were generating images and we love a coloring book. So I started typing, but rather than typing cactus, I typed catus, C-A-T-U-S. And so ChatGPT made me a cat that's made out of cacti. I printed this out. They can color it in the juice section. It was fun. So if I go back now to the one that identified my cow before, and this time I have it identify my cactus. Remember when I said, if you ask for an answer, it will give you one? It's 100% an illustration, 100% a cat. There's actually no, is there a cactus in here? No cactus, right? So it will give you one. It will then give you a bunch of different tags you can do. So once again, not perfect, but potential. All right. So here's the problem with library metadata and AI. Here's a problem with your life's work in the field you want to be in. No. The first is it's sparse. The metadata that we work with the cataloging is not rich metadata. It's not meant to be rich data. It's meant to be consequential, right? If we add a term, if we add a subject heading, if we add a classification, we don't want it to be a long conversation about the ethics of Foucault. We want it to be philosophy. Right? We want to be able to get that right. What that means is when you're in large language model world or any data crunching, we don't have a lot of data to crunch. I was talking with a few colleagues of mine at the UT libraries. We were saying, imagine we would train up a chatbot on our catalog, and you'd go, hey, what's the temperature today? And go, I don't know, but I have ennui. Have you thought about reading in this area? It's not rich. It's also, our library metadata is precise, as I said before, but large language models and AI see averages. They see most of. They seek the standard. They seek the average. And so when you're trying to be precise, you don't want the average. You usually want it to be an exception, right? In information, it's a difference that makes a difference. It's not everything. It's unique to its inherit. So AI doesn't work really well. Now we can talk about some partial solutions. Query expansion. Someone puts in a term, someone puts in a phrase, someone hopefully puts in a paragraph. We can run that through large language models and we can expand a search. We can find tags, we can find things that we can expand a search on. Yay, that's kind of cool. We can do digital document summarization and tagging. That is, instead of saying, here's a really sparse metadata record for a really rich piece of full text, we can say we're amplifying or connecting this sparse data to a really rich but concatenated abstract that we could generate on the fly. Generate language translations, be able to translate those digital documents, search against them, etc. And just like we talked about doing qualitative analysis, these tools actually do a good job in AI data visualization. Built into Excel, the most recent version, is what they call Copilot, is an AI. It will help you create a pivot table if you don't know what a pivot table is. It will help you analyze data that you may not have the statistical chops to do. In the next week to 2 weeks, we're going to put out a call to rural libraries who want to learn how to use AI to analyze the data coming out of their catalog. Right, so how to visualize it. We're going to use ChatGPT-4. We're going to use Excel's system, right? This is something that is really kind of fun and cool. But the real trick and the real power of libraries and AI is AI as augmented intelligence, not as artificial intelligence. So I'm going to give you a reference example. And the reference example is people asking reference questions. Hey, I need to know this, right? And so in Texas, in Texas, we looked at chat reference, and we took a number of representative chat interactions. We took the transcripts that the librarians had produced, anonymized it. We took the same query, put it in ChatGPT, and created ChatGPT. We then went to students and said, what do you think? It was a little bit more structured than that, but not much. And we found really interesting results. The first is that students could very quickly identify the AI answer from a human answer. 2, they initially doubted the AI answer. We have done a very good job of building a skeptical student population around AI. That's a good thing. But they either liked or they liked them both. They really wanted both of those answers. Because it turns out, for example, AI gives, once again, my father will give you an answer, and they like an answer. And those damn librarians would often make me do something, right? And so they wanted both, but they often wanted them in different times. If I'm just starting a research process, I want ChatGPT to give me the universe. If I'm about to turn in my thesis and I want to make sure I didn't miss anything, I want a librarian there who understands our resources and can run them. And so the answer to will AI replace reference librarians is no, but it will help them do their job better. There's a famous line that AI will not replace librarians. Librarians who know AI will replace librarians who don't. Right? We're looking at this. A community college in the local area happens to begin with the letter A, their initials. Talk to their librarians. They said, whenever I get a student, the first thing I do is take their query and run it through ChatGPT. Not for the answer, but the same way that we used to use and still do Wikipedia. Which is, it gave me a bunch of terms to start with. It gave me some potential areas to look at. It gave me query terminology. Right? So how can we put these two things together? Back to our tagging. I may not be comfortable letting the machine tag something that automatically goes into the catalog, but I'm happy to get some suggestions and assistance. I don't want this to report my data, but I want this to help me understand my data. And so how can we look at augmented intelligence? And what we're seeing is the current and future of AI, at least within the 2 months that we can predict, is this idea of librarians and AI working together and finding the right mix and finding where they are. It's very much the same method that we had to figure out with Google, that we had to figure out with Wikipedia, which is it's a tool. And unlike publishing, where it's existential crisis because it replaces or potentially replaces, here it amplifies. We've already made the transition from our collections being the truth and we hold the truth to we help search regardless of where the resources are. And we do it much better than others do. It's like, for example, Google. Let's pick on Google. Okay, let's do that. Google made a change about a month ago, where the first response to Google is an AI-generated response, right? And we're all pissed off because we all quickly just zoom past it because that's just where ads were anyway. AI discovered that reference is hard. And Google tried to go from pointing to potential answers or sources of answers to generating an answer. And they thought it was as simple as synthesizing the potential answers. It is not, and it never has been, right? So you got things like, if you weren't aware, look it up, it's hilarious, look on Google, it's hilarious. Things like, you should eat small rocks every day to ensure you have enough minerals in your diet. 3 cigarettes a day is fine for pregnant women. Running with knives, I'm not making this one up, running with knives can provide excellent cardio workout. If you have problem keeping cheese on top of your pizza, pour glue onto it. Now, when they went and said, where did this answer come from? They found The Onion, they found Reddit, God help me, Reddit. Let me be really clear, Reddit and Google have made a deal, so that's where it gets a lot of its answers. Yes, have a moment. That's where we actually understand the difference. And so not replacing us with AI, but how can it help us do our job better? How can it help us in identifying resources? How can it connect different materials together? So I want to give one example specifically around the catalog space. Reference authoring. The idea of being able to quickly build libguides on the fly or other reference resources on the fly. Once again, maybe not without human supervision, but that notion of, boy, I'm getting a lot of questions currently on ethnic representations of female politicians, and I don't have time to sit down and do that. And I can say, here's an on the fly one. And you can look at it and decide whether, but at least it's the first draft, right? We can begin to do things like identify what's happening really quickly, what kind of books, what kind of materials, what kind of queries, what kind of transactions are occurring, and quickly generate resources based on that at least the first draft comes from AI. Integration of reference into the catalog. We know that not everything in our catalog is particularly great. This is the definition of a great library, is a library full of lies, 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 right? But what we do know is in reference transactions, we not only get a reference to a resource, we get a qualitative assessment of that resource. This is the classic reference example where if a reporter comes up to a reference librarian at a public library and says, I need a really great resource on hate groups using the web to recruit children, the answer might be, here's Stormfront, great resource. A 10-year-old coming up looking for an after-school activity, not such a good resource, right? Context matters. And we can begin to pull that context from other things the library does. Our programming, our reference, our outreach, our libguides, all the other information production that our libraries currently do, we can begin to integrate within our resources and take our anemic data and take our highly specified data and add appropriately expansions and more context, right? And so we could do things like course integration and linking with real data. So imagine we have a book in the catalog. So this is my academic library friends. I can give you public examples and school library examples, but for a moment, we have a book in our catalog. That book may be referenced within a syllabi. This is my syllabi example. It may be referenced by a professor during a lecture that was recorded, and we can instantly transcribe with the use of AI tools. We can then connect that book through this syllabi. That syllabi also mentioned this book. That professor also mentioned this YouTube video, this other article. We can begin to not simply expand the data there, we can connect it together. We can create a flow. So over time, someone can say, ooh, I'm interested in that book.
Did you know it was used in a sociology class? Oh, that's interesting. Did you know it was also used in a fine arts class? Well, that's really interesting. Did you know it was also used in a, right? We can suddenly find things that we never knew existed, that suddenly these professors in radically different parts of the school are talking to each other, or should be talking to each other, because they're reading and referencing the same material. Now when we go to build chatbots or AI reference tools or train these things, we're not training it on our sparse data, we're using our sparse data to connect to very rich data that AI loves. And now we can begin to build different systems. So as an example, this semester, my students will have not only access to recorded lectures and previously lectures from previous years, they'll have access to a reading list and the full text of them, thank you, library. And this year, they'll have access to an AI chatbot that they can ask questions of those materials and that lecture. And they can begin to, I'm thinking about this for my term paper. What do I know about that? Oh, it's in this article. Oh, he talked about it this time. Oh, let me hear that clip. Now our sparse metadata, our koha, becomes the center of an AI expansion instead of, oh, that's poor metadata. It's on the side, right? We can counter when Google grabbed all of those ELC data that they could point to our collections, and they never did because it wasn't enough hook. It wasn't enough data for search engines to catch on to. Same thing with AI. It's not rich enough. But we, not within our one system, but across our enterprise, have lots of rich and powerful data that doesn't exist. We can now contextualize. Did the syllabus reference this article and say, this is the worst article I've ever read, don't read it? Or did they say, this is really great if you want to know about this? Now when people come to our catalog and they say, I'm looking for a good book on, I'm looking for a resource on, the answer comes back not just from, this matches your metadata query, but this is the context that came up. This was a central part of a discussion around topic X, Y, or Z. This is a whole hour on why that book is what you need to read. And the tools to implement these are becoming easy from our point of view. In other words, we don't have to get into Python. We don't have to do C++. We can link to these systems and use these systems and program these systems with our voice. Dave, will we still run into issues of hallucinations? Yes, you will. Dave, will we still run into a caddis problem? Yes, you will. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't start talking about it now and trying it and see where it works. And with that, deconstruct. ChatGPT does one thing. What does another system do? It has better systems, etc. I just want to end with one last thing. Narratives. AI has extraordinary opportunity for the library community, not in terms of its technology, not in terms of its implementation, but in terms of changing the conversation. What do I mean by that? Well, we all are aware of our happy book banning brothers and sisters. And they have a narrative, right? Parents' rights in the public space. Right? I, as a parent, I should be able to dictate what my children has access to. And the lamest response we can come up with, but not every child. It's like, all right, so you want the pornography to be available to every child but my child, right? It turns into a narrative trap. It is structured in a way, the narrative around book banning, around parental rights, to make librarians seem wrong. It's built that way. And so by engaging in this, we engage in their narrative. What if we change the narrative? And we do. We're getting much better at this, by the way. Much better. But AI gives us a chance to say things like, highlight the work we do for workforce development. Highlight the work we do around outreach and social equity and all these other things. And so the idea, for example, that if we built an AI training, an AI workshop, an AI session to help people in our community get the skills they need to find jobs, it gets really hard for, say, legislators to go, those grooming lib pedophile librarians do a fantastic job preparing tomorrow's workforce. Narratives matter, right? So AI gives us a chance to introduce ourselves to new populations, change a conversation from a losing narrative. But whether we talk about that or not, here's the narrative I want you to care a lot about.
It's the most depressing slide I've ever made. Several years ago, a Nobel winning economist and his wife were in Montana looking at some data, and they found something that didn't make sense. They found that the life expectancies, particularly of men, was declining. Men were dying younger in the United States. Now, why this was so important is if you were to define a developed nation, first world nation, whatever you want to talk about, there's very few measures that work better than life expectancy. If you were to track from 1900 to 2000, you would see a rise of life expectancy in the US and in England and in Sweden and in Denmark. Because we did things like put good sanitation. And a big thing is we learned how to deal with heart attacks. We learned about cardio care, people on statins, people doing all these other things. We've improved lives. But they were finding suddenly life expectancy was going down. And when they looked at the data, it was going down in a very, very unusual class, which are white, middle-aged men. Now, I don't know if I'm going to burst your bubble. Turns out in the United States, white, middle-aged men have it pretty well. Like, we're not struggling with a lot of stuff. So they're going, what is going on here? They, by the way, have looked at data and they found out it was happening also with people in the African American community. They found it was happening with women. They were happening, but it was happening in the middle age. And when they looked for one variable that tied everyone together, it was the presence of a 4-year degree. People who had a 4-year degree had standard expected and increasing lifespan. People without a 4-year degree were dying younger. When they looked at what they were dying of, it changed also. They weren't dying of heart attacks. They weren't dying of disease. They were dying of drug overdoses, complications from alcoholism, and suicide. And it was breaking all the demographic shifts. Suicide is a horrible, terrible thing. And it tends to inflict the more educated and younger parts of our population, not middle-aged white guys. And when they began looking at it, they called these the deaths of despair. And because a 4-year college degree, it wasn't what they learned in college. It was frankly the fact that they could afford college, right? 4 years college degrees are expensive. And so there's a socioeconomic status. But they also then looked at access to healthcare, and they looked at participation in politics, and they looked at participation in social systems. And what they found is people who were dying without college degrees were also socially isolated. They were people who did not have a strong network of which to pull from. Professional network, we saw a decline in religious populations. They didn't have a religious community they were a part of. They weren't connected. The Surgeon General came out with a report last year that said social isolation is the equivalent of smoking 12 cigarettes a day in terms of life expectancy. Honest to God, hard economic demographic data was demonstrating isolation as a killer. The reason I bring this up is twofold. One, AI is currently dominated and being built by the richest companies in the world. Google, Meta, OpenAI is Microsoft. They're the same group that built social media. They're the same group that replaced engagement with conflict. That is, it's one thing to go and look at pictures about people having a good time, but you're going to stay longer and see more ads if you're pissed off. So you put up and you see that lovely picture of your nephew, and under it someone said, "What a fat kid." You're going to, by God, be there yelling at someone about their fat kid. Greater anger, greater engagement. This is the same group that's building AI. And they're talking about building assistants, and they're talking about changing search, and your mood and music, and they're talking about virtual reality simulations. This is the organizations that we, as librarians, not only have to keep track of, but honestly have to solve its problem. This is people describing the symptoms of depression. By the way, self-diagnosed. The dark blue is before COVID. The light blue is after COVID. The people reporting no signs of depression, almost 80% before, only 50% after. People talking about moderate and severe, you can just see the data. We know that our communities are hurting. Whether those communities live in a place like Round Rock, whether they go to a school,
whether they go to your college, whether they teach at your college. There's a huge amount of social isolation, and it is deadly. We need to talk about how libraries save lives, how libraries create social connection, how we bring people together, whether it's to learn AI, whether it's to use AI to come up with the next product. The idea is to get them in a place. If you drive about 40 minutes north of here, you'll hit this little itty bitty town called Gerald. In Gerald, which is, the library is half the size of this room, every Thursday night, a group of elderly women show up for a book group. And you're going, turns out they're all recent widows. Turns out what they're really doing is they're a self-help group. But they can't say that, particularly their generation. So they call it a book club. And the library calls it a book club. And the library just happens to provide books for the club that are about grief and about getting over these areas. They create social connection. That same library, in the summer, the parents came and said, we have a huge population of teenagers with nothing to do, which is never safe. And so they made them all into volunteers. They came in and they would find materials and they would help out with different groups, etc. And they were suddenly connected together. The narrative we need to talk about, whether it's AI, whether it's how we build our collections, digital collections, is how libraries save lives. Our reason for being is not to circulate books. Our reason for being is not to occupy space. The reason that the community came together, talk to Michelle, around this brilliant building was not, we really want the books to have a nice house. They wanted a place where the Round Rock citizens could say, I'm part of that. I own that. I have a place to go. I can connect to people. We built training rooms and meeting rooms into a library. We create public spaces. We have programming to connect. Why? Because we connect people. Why? Because libraries save lives. Why are we using open source software which frees up resources that we would have had to pay to a proprietary system? Because we can use that money to build collections and programming and bring people together and save lives. Why are we spending the time to create new services? Why are we licensing ChatGPT so people can have workshops around it? Because it comes in, they work together, that saves lives. That's an argument that is important. We know in academic environments, we have students who are homeless. We know that part of our student population are going through mental abuse in their dormitories because their roommates are crushing them because they're LGBTQ or they don't meet their, and we know they flee to the library as a safe space because that's where we save lives. That's the narratives we need to look at. So as we look at koha, and as we look at AI, and as we look at all the things we can do with the system, the ultimate question we need to ask is, how does AI help us save lives? And it does that by meeting our mission requirements and helping us do what we do better. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time this morning.